Mary Ash could hear her heart thudding inside her tiny chest. As the prison bus came to a halt outside the Eastern State Penitentiary, the guard's stern command to stand and move to the front jolted her into action. Tear-streaked and trembling with fear, the 11-year-old girl struggled under the weight of the heavy chains clamped around her ankles and wrists. Convicted of arson, Mary had fought against the charges, but no one had supported her cause, not even her court-appointed defense attorney from North Carolina, who had shown little empathy for her mixed heritage. The prejudices she faced were compounded by her biracial background, intensifying the disdain of those around her. As the steel mesh partition between the bus's rear and the front door slid open, Mary was yanked through. She collided with the cage as the prison guard dragged her from the bus. A bag was harshly pulled over her head, plunging her into darkness as she was led through a seemingly endless maze of rooms and corridors. Eventually she was shoved into a small cell where she would spend the coming years. When the hood was finally removed, Mary's eyes adjusted to the dim light of her new confinement. The cell was stark, just a small bed by the wall, a crude table, and a water basin, a makeshift storage, a toilet, and a stool. She turned to look back at the entrance just as the door slammed shut. Turning the other way, she saw only a small slot, now closed, where her food would be passed. Overwhelmed by the despair that had gripped her from the moment she arrived, Mary let out a heart-wrenching scream. It reverberated off the cold stone walls as she cried until her eyes were spent. Shivering from fear and the cold, she collapsed on the floor and fell into a restless sleep. 2 years later, Mary Ash's suffering ended as she lay in her prison cell, coughing up the darkened blood tainting her lungs. At just 13 years old, she succumbed to tuberculosis, a tragic victim of a cruel system. Born in North Carolina near the end of the Civil War, Mary's life was cut short in 1876 when she was sent to the Eastern State Penitentiary for a crime she may not have committed. Her death inside those walls marked a sorrowful chapter in the prison's dark history. Welcome to another haunting episode of This Happened Here. Today we delve into the eerie corridors of Eastern State Penitentiary, located at 2027 Fairmount Avenue in Philadelphia. If you're intrigued by the spine-chilling stories of places like this, hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. It helps us bring more captivating tales to light. I'm LT Bartek, and today we'll explore some of the most unsettling accounts from this infamous prison. Over its 140-year history, Eastern State Penitentiary witnessed the death of over 1,000 people, and more than 600 succumbed to tuberculosis alone. These tragedies have only added to its reputation as one of the most haunted places in America. The prison's grim history and imposing architecture have given rise to numerous unsettling stories. Visitors and staff frequently reported ghostly figures and unexplained phenomena. Notorious hotspots include Cell Block 12 and the basement, where shadowy figures and sudden cold spots are commonly reported. Disembodied voices, eerie footsteps, and slamming doors are often heard, especially in solitary confinement cells. Witnesses describe strange, unexplained lights moving through the dark corridors, further fueling the prison's haunting legend. Paranormal investigations have revealed unusual equipment malfunction and eerie findings. The notorious hole, a solitary confinement area, is infamous for evoking profound dread and unease among those who approach it. Among the most famous stories is that of a former warden allegedly seen roaming the prison grounds and a phantom inmate in old-fashioned garb. The old chapel also contributes to the eerie atmosphere with reports of ghostly figures and unexplained organ music. Built between 1822 and 1839, Eastern State Penitentiary was hailed as the world's first true penitentiary, designed to reform inmates through isolation. At a cost of $800,000, it was a marvel of its time, featuring individual exercise areas and private toilets. Despite these apparent comforts, the separate system of isolation often drove inmates to madness rather than reform. The severe psychological toll led to widespread criticism, and by the late 19th century, the prison adopted the New York system, allowing limited communication among prisoners. Eastern State housed notorious criminals like Willie Sutton and Al Capone, who I will talk more about later. Capone, in particular, enjoyed a luxurious cell with mahogany paneling and a radio, starkly contrasting the harsh conditions endured by other inmates. Slick Willie Sutton, known for his escape artistry, attempted a daring escape from Eastern State, though he was eventually recaptured. I'll tell that story as well later. The prison's grim legacy includes the story of Joseph Red Duffy's murder by George Machine Gun Kelly. That's another story I'll tell later. Despite its troubled history, Eastern State Penitentiary was preserved after its closure in 1971 and reopened to the public in 1994. Today it stands as a haunting relic, inviting visitors to reflect on its dark past. When Charles Dickens visited Eastern State Penitentiary in 1842, he was deeply unsettled by its design. He described it as having a system that is rigid, strict, and hopelessly solitary. Dickens condemned it, stating, "I believe it in its effect to be cruel and wrong. I hold this slow and daily tampering with the mysteries of the brain to be immeasurably worse than any torture of the body." The Eastern State Penitentiary was founded in 1829 by the Society of Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prisons. Eastern State was envisioned as a pioneering institution where inmates would find redemption through solitude. It was to be the world's first true penitentiary. Most prisoners are designed primarily to safeguard the public from those incarcerated within their walls. While Eastern State Penitentiary certainly aimed to fulfill this protective role, it also had a unique focus: to shield the prisoners from the outside world. Its design reflected a dual purpose: isolating inmates from society and creating a barrier that protected them from external influences and interactions, immersing them in a cocoon of enforced solitude intended to facilitate their personal reform. At its inception, Eastern State was a marvel of its time. While President Andrew Jackson was still using a chamber pot, Eastern States inmates enjoyed private toilets, were served 3 hearty meals daily, and had individual exercise areas. Skylights in the cells allowed divine light to filter in. Despite these apparent comforts, the prison was a place of torment. What made Eastern State uniquely grim was its separate system. Prisoners were isolated from one another completely. They ate alone, exercised alone, and read the Bible, the only book permitted, alone. Interaction with guards or fellow inmates was forbidden. When removed from their cells, they wore hoods, and guards padded their footsteps with felt to maintain silence. The separate system was conceived with a lofty goal: to compel prisoners to deeply self-reflect, recognize the gravity of their offenses, and emerge as reformed individuals. The very term penitentiary reflects its aim. Derived from the word penitence, it was envisioned as a place where one could atone for crimes through introspection and repentance. In theory, this system was designed to create an environment where the isolation would drive inmates to confront their moral failings and foster a sincere commitment to change. The hope was that this profound solitude would lead to genuine remorse and personal transformation. Yet, in practice, the relentless and unyielding isolation often had the opposite effect. The very solitude that was meant to encourage penitence frequently pushed inmates to the brink of madness. The psychological strain of such extreme isolation, devoid of human contact or meaningful interaction, led many to experience severe mental distress and instability. Far from achieving the intended reform, the system instead revealed the dark side of enforced silence and solitary confinement. Upon entering the prison, the prisoners had bags placed over their heads, effectively severing their connection to the outside world. Guided by guards through a maze of interconnected doors, they were ushered directly to their cells, isolating them from any human interaction from the very start. The only external contact they experienced was sporadic, with a pastor visiting to deliver sermons a few times each month. Aside from these brief encounters, communication among the inmates was non-existent, as the thick concrete walls between their cells prevented any vocal or coded exchanges. In the prison's original design, there was no doors to the cells, only small openings through which food could be passed. Access to these cells was from the exercise area, a design that further emphasized their isolation. This architectural choice reflected the indifference of the affluent, predominantly white designers who lacked an understanding of the social and emotional needs of the impoverished individuals they were incarcerating. The idealistic notion of prison reform through isolation quickly revealed its flaws by the late 1790s. Eastern States' design, meant to enforce complete isolation, ultimately proved its undoing. Historical records show a diverse inmate population, with African Americans disproportionately represented and changing immigration patterns, bringing Irish, German, Italian, and Eastern European prisoners over the years. Women, though few, were also imprisoned here until 1923. Early in its history, the prison grappled with resistance and rebellion from its inmates. Forced to engage in labor, prisoners were assigned tasks such as weaving baskets, crafting furniture, and shoemaking. Although these activities necessitated some interaction, their identities remained concealed by bags placed over their heads. Nonetheless, there were instances when the hoods were pulled back, exposing their faces to the guards and compromising their anonymity. Despite these precautions, inmates found ways to subvert the system. They sabotaged their work and devised covert communication methods to defy the oppressive regime. The prison's reputation suffered a significant blow in 1833 due to a notorious scandal involving the death of prisoner Matthias Macomse. Macomse perished after being subjected to the iron gag, a cruel device intended to silence him. Although officials were cleared of wrongdoing, the incident cast a long shadow over the prison's legacy. Matthias Macomse, aka the Mad Trapper, was an inmate at Eastern State Penitentiary in the early 20th century. He was serving time for a series of criminal activities. Still, the specific details about his crime and background are less well documented than those of more notorious inmates like Al Capone and Willie Sutton. But sometime in 1938, Macomse was involved in a violent altercation with prison staff. During this period, the conditions at Eastern State was notoriously harsh, and tensions between inmates and guards were high. Macomse was reportedly involved in an incident where he attacked a guard or another inmate. The exact detail of the altercation are not always precise, but it resulted in a violent and chaotic situation. Following the incident, an iron gag was put on Macomse and he was beaten to death by the guards. The death of Macomse was one of several instances of violence at Eastern State Penitentiary, which contributed to the reputation for harsh treatment and brutal conditions. Despite the prison's ambitious goals, Eastern State struggled financially compared to more self-sufficient Auburn-style prisons. After its closure in 1971, Eastern State fell into decay and was nearly destroyed. However, thanks to preservationists, it was saved and reopened to the public in 1994. Today, it is a haunting relic of its grim past, a place of eerie grandeur that invites visitors to reflect on its history. As mentioned before, while in operation, Eastern State Penitentiary had some notable prisoners. Alphonse Scarface Capone, the notorious gangster, spent a brief but infamous stint at Eastern State Penitentiary from 1929 to 1930. Yet his experience behind bars was far from a typical prison grind. Instead of sharing a cramped cell with hardened criminals, Capone was treated to a luxurious suite. Mahogany paneling adorned his private cell, and he enjoyed amenities most inmates could only dream of. He had a radio, a plush rug, and even a desk. It was as if he had traded the bustling streets of Chicago for a high-end hotel room. His privileged treatment was no accident. Capone's influence extended beyond the prison walls, and his notoriety ensured he received special consideration. The authorities, wary of the potential for riots or escapes, were eager to keep him content. But the gilded cage couldn't shield Capone from the ravages of time and disease. The isolation and solitude of prison life, coupled with untreated syphilis, took a toll on his physical and mental health. By the time he was released in 1930, the once mighty gangster was a shadow of his former self. William Francis Slick Willie Sutton was a notorious bank robber and escape artist who also spent time at Eastern State Penitentiary. Sutton was imprisoned there in 1919 after being convicted of robbery. His time at Eastern State was marked by his reputation as a master escape artist, contributing to his notoriety. Here is that story. It was 1924. All was quiet as usual outside his prison door. Suddenly, William Sutton heard the huffing and puffing as his cellmate crawled up the makeshift ladder from the hole they had dug for the last few months. He pulled his dirt-covered cellmate out the hole and replaced him. William crawled almost 100 feet inside the tunnel and picked up the small shovel his cellmate had left behind. He continued his dig. After a few hours, he punched through and inhaled the clean, fresh air of the night wafting up to him from Fairmont Street. Rushing back, crawling as fast as he could, he gathered his things and with the help of the guard he had paid off, he got the 11 other prisoners to his cell. The guard was told to move in the opposite direction and create a distraction long enough to get everyone out the hole and to freedom. The moment William set his legs down from the makeshift ladder onto Fairmont Street, his heart soared and he smiled. Almost everyone ran in different directions and he made his way to the train station. But Lady Luck was not courting him tonight. And just a few minutes later, he was back on his way to the Eastern State Penitentiary. After Sutton's recapture, he served several more years in various institutions before being released in 1931. Sutton's time at Eastern State Penitentiary is remembered as a statement to his ingenuity and his skill in outwitting the authorities. His escape were the stuff of legend and added to his reputation as one of the most resourceful criminals of his time. Now, the sad story of Joseph "Red" Duffy. It was a cool spring day. Prisoner Joseph "Red" Duffy walked into the prison's mess hall or exercise room. It is unsure which one it was, records have either, and sat down, unaware that he was being watched by George Machine Gun Kelly, a notorious criminal and mobster. He sat on the bench, hands inside his pocket, an evil sneer on his face, and watched Duffy. George Kelly had been stewing for days. He wanted that kitchen job. He could get to hang out with his best friend and, as a perk, get more food. But his recurring thought was, this warden suck-up Duffy was given his job. Kelly was furious, and he hated the man to the core. One day, he walked over to his kitchen staff bud and asked him to get him a knife. He got it by the end of the day, just before sundown, and smiling to himself, he sat in his cell and sharpened it until it was paper thin. The next day, on March 8th, 1930, when Kelly saw Duffy, he got up slowly, so as not to draw any attention, and walked up to him. Using the sharpened kitchen knife, he plunged it deep inside Duffy. Duffy went down, but Kelly managed to do it just a few more times before the guards came and pulled him away. A maniacal laughter rang out as if from deep inside his chest, and the rest of the prisoners could hear him laughing all the way to the dungeon where he would be put into solitary. More solitary than the rest of the prison. There, he would not even have God's light shining down on him. Before we wrap up, I'd like to mention that several films have been showcased here. Here are a few of the most popular ones.
to it, man. You wanna play rap? I kill for fun. That's what I do, man.
But all that's about to change.
We made it, man.
This is a place for crazy people.
I'm not saying you're not mentally ill. For all I know, you're crazy as a loon.
The army of the 12 monkeys, they're the ones that spread the virus.
Monkeys.
Top secret. Do not tell my mother. Any of these look like the symbols you saw?
Where did you get these?
Archaeologists found these unexplained markings in ancient ruins all over the world.
8 days to live.
If you don't go back, Lewis will hang.
To make a choice.
You're talking about 3 years in prison.
To save a friend.
That wraps up our tour of Eastern State Penitentiary. If you enjoyed this dive into its dark history, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment to let us know your thoughts. Come back next week for some other stories of what we found on our way back from Connecticut. I promise you won't want to miss it. Remember to love yourself and others, and I will catch you on the next one. Love you. Bye.